This is the motto of the show Hour of the Truth. Rome never changes. They used to call us heretics and sent the Inquisition to kill us. Today they call us terrorists and send on their crusades. Times and methods may have changed, the goal still stays the same. Extirpate the remnant of the true Word of God, Bible-believing people who uphold the truth in Jesus Christ's name.
From 1203 to 1805, 50 million Christians died, suffering at the hands of Rome, 'cause they believed in Christ alone. They died through Europe, especially Spain, for they saw all but Christ as vain. He suffered by his death for men, to save them from their awful sin. 600 years of martyred saints that history cannot erase. With iron heel and iron hand, the Roman popes rule the land. Those ignorant of history may be swept into apostasy. We won't be lulled by Rome's sweet lie, with 50 million reasons why. Salvation is by faith alone, in Christ alone, by grace alone. A sovereign God give faith to man. Salvation's in the Maker's hand. This gospel offends Rome today. They offer up another way, a counterfeit, a compromise. Beware the ancient papal lie, with such a cloud of witnesses who by grace died in their Lord. Recall their memory to say, by the same faith we live today.
And this is life eternal, that they might know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. Hello and welcome everybody to a new video from Jörg Joggler 66, Hour of the Truth. Today we are here for the next part of this wonderful series, Hour of the Truth. And I produce now something that is not existent up to now. There were a few broadcasts under the name of University of Hidden History, the Jesuits 101. Those were actually 5 broadcasts. And I added a 6th one into that doesn't belong there, but I thought it would belong there, so I made it belonging in there, of the Jesuit banking system. That was Hour of the Truth, part 74. Now we are even in the next part 75, and this one is called University of Hidden History, Jesuit Power in Russia. And we are going to hear a lecture by Jon Phelps, where he tells us that many people know by the lectures he did, by the book he wrote, they know it from Jon Phelps, they know it from other people, that America is run by the Jesuits, that Europe is run by the Jesuits, that maybe even China is run by the Jesuits. But Russia? Putin? What about all this Ukraine stuff today in 2026, where I record this? And this video from Jon Phelps is from 2017, so that's 5 years before this Ukrainian war, quote-unquote war, broke out in 2022. So what about Russia? I mean, I always knew that Putin was a former KGB agent, and I knew that Russia was controlled by the Jesuits because I read in German the book The Kremlin and the Vatican. That's a German book. About 500 years of history of the Roman Catholic Church trying to get the Orthodox Catholic Church back under her wings. And I knew there were Jesuits involved, even though that book does not mention very much Jesuits, but you can make that up from the things that are done there. And then I stumbled upon this video from Jon Phelps where it speaks about the power of the Jesuits in Russia, or the Jesuit power in Russia. And the question, of course, do the Jesuits even run Russia? They run it all. And when you know the history of the Jesuits, like from the book from Griesinger that I read in German and that Jon Phelps mentioned and read of in the earlier parts of this University of Hidden History series, you know that the Jesuits were all around the world. They started off in 1540, and directly they went into Japan, they went into China, they went into India, and for crying out loud, of course, they also went into Russia. And they were expelled from Russia as they were expelled from other countries too, but that doesn't mean that they were really not there anymore. So Jon Phelps now breaks down the history, at least of the last 120 years, from the beginning of the 20th century up to the 21st century. No, not really. He doesn't go into the current time that we are living in right now. But from what he says here, you can make on you can surely understand that nothing has changed. And when you know the oath of the Jesuits, you know that they always play both sides. Of course they play the Russian side. Now you're going to say, but Jörg, when they're going to quote-unquote play both sides and do this and do that, why doesn't their agenda already come to an end? Well, because they are greedy little bastards. And the world is full of greedy little bastards. They want money. They want people who are not in the knowledge to suffer. They want to persecute people who have different beliefs than theirs, means every belief different than that from the Roman Catholic Church. They want these people absolutely exterminated, and that is not just done in a few years, not even in a few decennia. It takes a lot of time. And they are working meticulously to get that done. And therefore, they need to control both sides. So, and with both sides, I mean actually all sides. Yeah, you don't have just one side, right and left. You also have back and front, above and beneath. I mean, you have as many sides as you have in a cubist, probably. So they want to control it all. They control it all, and then by clashing a few parties together, they're all their enemies. They make sure that their enemies delete themselves without them even knowing it. That worked wonderfully in all the wars of the last almost 500 years since the Jesuit order is in existence. And surely since the 20th century with World War I and World War II. And on the basis of World War I, of course, also is the whole Zionist movement that is Jesuitical, is the communist movement that is Jesuitical, and in that communist movement, the Bolshevik movement, the movement of Lenin, of Stalin, of Trotsky, of all this, Jon Phelps is going in this wonderful lecture that is called, I call this video, Hour of the Truth, University of Hidden History, Jesuit Power in Russia. The video on YouTube, of which the link, of course, in the description box of this video to be found, is called Jesuit Power in Russia. And you can listen to this wonderful lecture of Jon Phelps from 2017 and learn a lot about the Jesuits in Russia and how they not only rule Russia, China, United States, Europe, South America, Africa, they run it all. They absolutely run it all. And they run over mankind and stamp on mankind with their iron staff. Yeah, because the last beast, Rome, is the iron beast that stamps with his feet the residue of all Bible-believing Christians in this world. That's what it actually is all about. But enough of my little introduction. Let's turn it over to Jon Phelps.
Okay, my name is Jon Phelps. This is the 4th day of September 2017, and I was asked to review a little bit of what I know about the Jesuit power in Russia, especially since the Bolshevik Revolution. I cover this in my book, Vatican Assassins, but I'm doing this for an Orthodox friend who in turn is going to tell certain Orthodox leaders what I have said today. So before I begin to tell the story of a certain Jesuit that I knew, I want to prefix or have a nice little prelude to what I'm saying so that it becomes believable. Nobody that I know of has ever done an extensive proof, has ever provided an extensive proof that the Jesuits were in complete control of the Bolshevik Revolution and its outcome. So I think I'll review that for a little bit. You have time?
Plenty.
And so we'll just go back. And I want you to be reminded that the Jesuits considered the Orthodox Church heretic and to be returned to the fold of the Pope of Rome pursuant to the doctrine of the temporal power, that every human creature is to be subject to the Pope of Rome both spiritually and politically, which is the two keys that are on the Vatican flag. So Russia was a thorn in the side of the Jesuits, even from the days of Peter the Great, because Peter the Great expelled the Jesuits from all of Russia in 1723. And it wasn't long after that he was poisoned with his favorite dish, which was porridge. So Peter the Great was poisoned by Jesuits. The Jesuits were not expelled, then came back into Russia. And the punishment for Russia was the Jesuits using Napoleon Bonaparte to attack Russia, because Napoleon was advised by Jesuit Abbe Sieyès, and I cover this in my book. And Abbe Sieyès was the one who coordinated what Napoleon would do, and also was in cahoots with Russian Jesuits that were facilitating an easier invasion of Napoleon into Russia. And this was for a twofold purpose. Napoleon was to punish the Orthodox. He was to punish the Russian leaders. He didn't like Alexander I, of course, and when they met at Tilsit, they had a conference there. I believe it was on a barge. But the Jesuits used Napoleon to invade Russia, and they also were involved in setting Moscow on fire, because Napoleon invades in the winter, and he's not going to be allowed to winter in Moscow. And this is why Napoleon will use that fire in Russia, in Moscow, to deliberately leave Russia and to move west. And at that time, he's going to sacrifice much of his army in the snows of Russia and also to the swords of the Cossacks. He leaves Russia on a sleigh driven by 4 horses, abandons his armies in Russia, just as the Jesuits told him to do. This is 1812, thereabouts. Goes back to Germany and to Dresden, shows up there. Not long after, he is going to be arrested and confined to Elba. And the Holy Alliance is going to take place, the Congress of Vienna in 1814. In 1815, and there at the Congress of Vienna, the monarchs, Alexander I and others, are going to squabble. And so the Jesuits release Napoleon from Elba, and for the 100 days, Napoleon gathers his old forces and troops with the outward policy of finally resisting the altar and the throne in France, only for him to take up the wrong mount there at Waterloo, according to Thomas Jonathan Stonewall Jackson, when Jackson reviewed the battlefield in the 1850s, before the war between the states would begin. And Jackson said Napoleon took up the wrong field position. And that's exactly what Napoleon did. He took up the wrong field position, and because of the juncture with the Prussians and the British under Wellington, Napoleon sacrifices his army at Waterloo, all at the behest of Abyssias. His right-hand man, Abyssias, was the second consul of the three-man consulate, which was Napoleon, Abyssias, and Robert Doulos. So Napoleon flees Waterloo, and he is captured by the British, and he is sent to St. Helena, where he gives his memoirs, and he writes the memoirs of Napoleon, and his General Montholon is his writer, and Napoleon writes about the power of the Jesuit order, and that the Jesuits are an army, and the general wants worldwide power. And you can find this quote in his memoirs by Father Cheneke in his 50 Years in the Church of Rome. So the Jesuits controlled Napoleon in his invasion of Russia, and the Russian people were warned of their invasion, of their future dealings with the Jesuits by the great Fyodor Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky was one of Russia's greatest literary men in the 1880s. He wrote a book titled The Brothers Karamazov, and there's a portion of the book, or a book within the book, titled The Grand Inquisitor. In The Grand Inquisitor, Dostoevsky says that the Jesuits want worldwide earthly dominion. They don't even believe in God, perhaps. So Dostoevsky will warn the Russian Orthodox people of the plan of the Jesuits to take Russia. Back to Napoleon. Napoleon is confined at Elba, confined at St. Helena. He is later poisoned. There he doesn't escape and go to New Orleans, which is nonsense. Joe Weider wrote in his very good book, The Death of Napoleon, he was poisoned at St. Helena.
Now, on a different note, I really don't want to interrupt Eric here about what he says about Napoleon, but I just want to tell you that some 40 years ago, when I was a youngster, didn't believe in God or anything else, here and there I already had a little awakening of reading something of history, and I bought a book about the murder of Napoleon, where it is proof shown by the dead body. They analyzed the hair, and they found arsenic in the hair, so that he was poisoned. It was even found that it was given to him in different doses, and from that, so that he was a little bit more poisoned, then again a little bit less. In the beginning lesser, in the end more and more, to make it work more. So he was poisoned by arsenic. And the author of the book wanted to show who the murderer of Napoleon was, and he came up with that it was his butler. Of course, what this book never mentions is any connection to religiosity, never any mentioning of anything like the Roman Catholic Church, and surely not of the Jesuits. But in that book, at least it is stated that he was A, killed, and B, that his murderer was his butler, and that he was poisoned by arsenic. So what Eric Jon Phelps says here, on a bygone by way, yeah, he was killed, he was poisoned. That is true, and there are even books written about that. I don't know if that book is available anymore. I read it in German anyway. I just want to tell you that some more than 40 years ago that I read that, that I knew that he was poisoned. And we all know that poisoning is one of the most, if not the most favorite way for the Jesuits to deal with their adversaries and to kill them. They killed so many people, I think we can make a list that would succeed hundreds of people in there. So really a very good point that Eric makes here. I just want to underline that point and tell you that even 40 years, more than 40 years ago, I read that book in German, and I know from that is confirmation, and that guy came up with it was the butler, probably because he had access or so, I don't know. I don't remember that anymore. But absolutely, Napoleon was killed, he was poisoned by arsenic, and that's just what I wanted to add here.
And about this time, about 1820, the Tsar Alexander I, who was a Christian, he was a Bible-believing, born-again Christian man, he had allowed freedom of worship in Russia. And at the time, the Orthodox leaders didn't like that because they considered that a threat to their monopoly of religious power, as they were protected by the Romanov dynasty. See, Orthodox Church then had the unification of church and state, as do the Protestants, unlike the Baptists. So, Tsar Alexander discovered that the Jesuits were plotting the overthrow of his kingship, of him being Tsar, that they wanted temporal power in Russia. So in 1820, the great Tsar Alexander I expelled the Jesuits from all the Russias. And so the Jesuits were expelled, and they took up residence in Georgia, just outside of Russia. And they took over an Orthodox seminary there called Tiflis Seminary, because the Jesuits had been penetrating the Orthodox Church. Hadn't quite controlled it yet, but there were Jesuit priests in Orthodoxy, especially at that seminary. And there would be a specific priest there who would train Joseph Stalin years later. We'll talk about that in a minute. So the Jesuits were expelled from all of Russia by Tsar Alexander I, and the Tsar got wind that the Jesuits were controlling the Masonic Lodge. So he shut down every Masonic Lodge in Russia in 1822. So in my book, Tsar Alexander I was a national hero, a Bible-believing Christian man who sought to protect his Russian people from being taken over by the Jesuit order, who had vowed to do this pursuant to the Council of Trent and their moral theologies, which I call the Jesuit immoral theology. And so, for that, Alexander I dies suddenly of what historians will call apoplexy. Well, apoplexy is translated by myself, means poisoning. They poisoned Peter the Great in 1723. They poisoned Alexander I in 1825. But they were still expelled from Russia at this time. So another Tsar comes to power. He's known as Nicholas I. Nicholas I is a traitor. Nicholas I will enter into a concordat with the Pope on behalf of the Russian government. And this is covered in a book titled Descent into Darkness by James Zatko. He was a priest that taught at Notre Dame University in the 1960s, and his book is essential for your library. So, concerning the Jesuits and Russia. It's all about the Jesuits being involved with the Bolshevik Revolution and their hand in it, although he's not as detailed as he needs to be. So, Nicholas I enters into a concordat with the Pope, but Alexander II comes to power, and he does away with that concordat. So now Alexander II becomes an enemy of the Jesuits. So the Jesuits will raise up a group called the Anarchists in Russia and throughout Europe and even in America. It's an international anarchist conspiracy to remove certain heads of state that are not in sympathy with the Jesuit order. These anarchists will kill Alexander II. They will kill the King of Italy, Umberto I, because he's an enemy of the Jesuits. They will kill Victor Emmanuel II, who is an enemy of the Jesuits and the father of Umberto I. They will kill James Garfield in 1881 because James Garfield refuses to be subject to the temporal power of the Pope. They will kill McKinley in 1901 because McKinley will become a disobedient Protestant low-level Freemason, and they'll put Theodore Roosevelt in his place after they kill him. The anarchists will kill Sissy. Sissy was the wife of the Emperor Ferdinand, who is the emperor of the Habsburg Empire. Franz Joseph. Kill Sissy. The assassin will stab her through the heart with a three-sided file, nick her heart, and she'll be brought back to die in her mansion while she's walking with a Rothschild lady in Geneva. This assassin walks right up to her and stabs her through the heart. Anarchists. These anarchist savages will kill 50 heads of state in the last portion of the 19th century. All of these anarchists run by the Jesuits, and when the communists take over in Russia, the anarchists are either killed or merged into the Bolshevik Communist Party. So, the Jesuits are infuriated with the Orthodox Church leadership in 1870 because they will not attend Vatican I. That's the First Vatican Council. And in the First Vatican Council, the Jesuits, in control of that council, with all sorts of intrigue, will have the Pope decreed to be infallible when he speaks ex cathedra. When the Jesuits accomplish this, they will be able to control the entire Roman papacy through a single man, the Pope. Today we have our first Jesuit Pope, Francis I, which even shows more of their power. Remember, every Pope has to have a Jesuit confessor, so that the Jesuit general knows the very thoughts and mind of every Pope. So, the Jesuits are furious with the Orthodox. They refuse to attend Vatican I, and Alexander II does away with a concordat that the Rome had with the Tsar Nicholas I. So Alexander II is murdered. He is blown up in a carriage. They blow off his legs. After the 5th attempt, they finally kill him. I believe it's the 5th attempt. Solzhenitsyn writes about this in his Gulag Archipelago, in the murder of the Tsar. The Tsar Alexander II was a great Tsar. He was the one who freed all the serfs in Russia. He was getting ready to sign a Russian constitution. He did away with the secret police, the Okhrana. I mean, Tsar Alexander I was a friend of the common man. So there was no need of the communists or the anarchists to kill him. He was not the typical Russian tyrant. The Jesuits wanted him to be tyrant. And so, they killed him, and they brought his son to power, who was Alexander III. Alexander III became a complete and total Jesuit tyrant. Alexander III launched a huge pogrom against the Jews. He blamed the Jews for the murder of his father because one Jew was involved. And so we have this huge pogrom against the Jews, overseen by the Jesuits through Alexander III. This evil, horrible, terrible, Jesuit-controlled Tsar. So by this time, the Jesuits have killed 3 good Tsars. They killed Peter the Great in 1723. They killed Alexander I in 1825, and now they killed Alexander II in 1881. And celebrating their murder by having a great big Jewish pogrom. I think they killed 300,000 Jews in Russia. Wonderful Jesuit time. So, if you wonder if the Jesuits hate the Jews, you just need to read E. Boyd Barrett's work, Rome Stoops to Conquer. Rome Stoops to Conquer. And that ex-Jesuit E. Boyd Barrett tells us of the hatred the Jesuit order at the top has for the Jews, and this is why no Jew was allowed in the Jesuit order from 1593 to 1946. So, back to Russia. The Jesuits then began plotting the final solution to the Jewish question. And they start this in about the 1880s. In Germany, France, the Jesuits will write the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. And as I quote that in my book, that fact, it comes from a certain gentleman who wrote a book titled Behind the Dictators. Behind the Dictators, he wrote that work in 1942, and he shows that the protocols of the elders of Zion are nothing more than the secrets of the elders of the Borg Fontaine. The Jews never wrote the protocols of the elders of Zion. Leo Lehmann was the author of Behind the Dictators, a Roman Catholic priest who was saved. He came to know the Lord, believed the gospel that Christ died for his sins, was buried and rose again, truly repented, was a believer, and hence he writes this book.
Yes, thank you very much, Eric. I am very grateful for that you are mentioning this wonderful book Behind the Dictators by Leo Herbert Lehmann, a Roman Catholic priest who later in his life came to the true belief of Jesus Christ, as I can read everywhere. I don't know if that's true or not. I hope it was the case. I just wanted to say that this book, Behind the Dictators, is to be found for free on my internet archive, archive.org. I read the complete book in English on YouTube. There's a playlist out, and the playlist will be added to the description of this video, so you can find it easily. Also download the book. And a German brother in Christ of mine some years ago translated that book into German. So the book also is available in German language, and I read the German book also on video on YouTube. There are a few parts, in English a few, and in German I think 5 or 6, who are not available on YouTube anymore because YouTube deleted them because it is against their community guidelines or something else they don't like. Censorship, I call it, easy. But those videos can be found on archive, and if you don't find them, you can always contact me and I can send them to you, or we can talk about how to get them anyway. But it is a wonderful, wonderful work, and he proves that the book was written by Abbé Baruel. That was somewhere, I think, in the end of the 18th century that Abbé lived. And he wrote that book, and it was then refined a little bit. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion I'm talking about now. It was then refined a little bit, and then in the end of the 19th century, as Eric tells here, used to stir up anti-Semitism, so-called anti-Semitism, all over Europe. Mostly in France and in Germany, but also in Russia. And there's an interesting video on YouTube about quote-unquote 6 million, if you look that up. There's a guy who has original American newspapers from I think starts 1913, 1914 somewhere, until the 1930s, where they talk about 6 million killed Jews. And nobody knew about the Holocaust at that time that so-called took place. That's not the point that I'm making here. The point is that there were already 6 million Jews in peril in Russia in the beginning of the 20th or end of the 19th century. So there you see this whole agenda of 6 million already long time before anybody even talked about the Holocaust. Interesting, of course, to put that into your research. And the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, I put a few comments in there in that reading too, so avail yourself of the book of Leo Herbert Lehmann, or avail yourself of the reading that I did in English or in German. And now, let's go back to Eric.
So the Jesuits write the Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion in about the 1880s in France, on the border of Germany. The Jesuits will then begin to circulate the protocols in Russia. And the protocols are all true except for one fact. It's not the Jews that are behind the protocols. It's not the Jews doing all these things. It's the Jesuits. And even in the protocols, they say our only enemy of us Jews are the Jesuits. It says it right in the protocols. So the Jesuits wrote the protocols, and everything they wrote in there, they brought to pass. The French Revolution, they talk about, was their work. How they control Freemasonry, how they kill certain Freemasons that are not obedient to them, how they poison the Gentile nations with vaccinations and inoculations. All of this, they brought it to pass. The Jesuits have done all of these things. The control of banking, everything that you read in the protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion are true, except it's not the Jews who are responsible. There are certain Jews working on this, but they're subject to the Jesuits. As my late friend Sherman Skolnick said, these are hawk Jews. These are papal court Jews. They're Masons, like the ADL and B'nai B'rith and others. It's Masonic Jews who are Freemasons, subject secretly to the Pope. So they're circulating the protocols of the Elders of Zion in Russia to incite anti-Jewish fury in Russia. Because the Orthodox Church for years was against the Jews. The Orthodox Church was helped and aided and abetted the pogroms of Alexander III. There was no outcry amongst the Patriarch and others. And then in 1905, we have the greatest Jewish pogrom in the history of Russia, when Tsar Nicholas II, a Knight of Malta, of the Russian branch of the Knight of Malta, just like Len Horowitz is a member of the Russian branch of the Knights of Malta, for which he sued me for a couple of things in his lawsuit. Thank God the judge killed. The Russian branch of the Knights of Malta is just as wicked as any other branch. because they all trace their origin back to Blessed Gerard, the founder of the Knights of Malta in like 1048, the Knights Hospitallers, the Crusaders who would take Jerusalem from the Muslims, from the Saracens, in 1099 and hold it for approximately 80 years or so. You can see a movie about this called The Kingdom of Heaven, when Salah ad-Din finally takes Jerusalem from the Knights of Malta, the Knights of the Equestrian Order, and the Templars, in 1191, I believe. It's called the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. And today, Israel, in the eyes of the Pope, is the revived Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem. And so, you have the greatest pogrom in Russian history in 1905, spearheaded by Knight of Malta Nicholas II, aided and abetted and encouraged by his cousin, King George V of Great Britain. And I have a picture of them. It's a very famous picture of the two cousins standing together. They look like identical twins. So King George V, so English, remember the English language, the English tongue of the Knights of Malta. Nicholas II, a member of the Russian tongue. I have a book on the Knights of Malta, written in the early 1900s, dedicated to Nicholas II, who was the Tsar and protector of the Russian tongue of the Knights of Malta. This is important. This is very important because there is no successful Bolshevik revolution without the Knights of Malta in Russia working with the Knights of Malta in Great Britain at the time. And hence we're going to see the birth of the Anglo-American international white power structure that will facilitate the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 in October. So, this is all the history leading up now to the Bolshevik Revolution. And in this Bolshevik Revolution, the protocols of the learned elders of Zion will have spread through Russia through a certain Orthodox priest there, and that Orthodox priest is a Jesuit. And so they spread it out throughout Russia, creating this anti-Jewish fury. But the Jesuits are going to be very clever here. They're going to make the Bolshevik Revolution look Jewish. And so there will be leading Jews, Trotsky and others, Litvinov, and certain others, who will openly be leading the Bolshevik Revolution. But there in Lenin, he's a quarter or a half racial Jew. Whenever I speak of Jews, I speak of the race. I don't speak of the religion. The religion is irrelevant. The race is everything. Because the racial Hebrew Jewish Israelites are the ones promised all the good things to come of the Abrahamic covenant, of which the Lord Jesus Christ confirmed. Romans 15:8. Christ came to confirm the promises made unto the fathers, namely, specifically, the Abrahamic covenant. So it's a promise, it's a covenant, it's a racial covenant to the racial group of people known as the Hebrews, and also Israelites, and also Jews. Although remember, not all Jews are Hebrews, but all Hebrews are Jews according to the New Testament. Now, so the Bolshevik Revolution, they have certain leading things up to this. They have the Black Hundred in the early 1900s. They have an attempted revolution, but it doesn't succeed. We have the Jesuits sending Rasputin from Siberia, and he being introduced to the court of Tsar Nicholas II, the Knight of Malta. And it's Rasputin that will be the advisor of Nicholas II, and he will also be the seducer of the Russian royal family. Rasputin was a Jesuit, Orthodox priest, subject to his bishop that I name in my book. Famous picture of Rasputin with his bishop. And so the patriots rise up and they kill Rasputin. By the way, killing Rasputin was very difficult. They had a hard time killing that demon-possessed wicked sinner. And they killed Rasputin, and then the Tsar was accused of allowing Rasputin to seduce his court. The Bolshevik Revolution takes place. And guess who facilitates a successful Bolshevik Revolution? The British and the Americans. Which tells you that the Jesuits ran the British Empire, they ran the Parliament, they ran the Queen, they ran the King at the time, who is now George V, through the Knights of Malta. George V had a Jesuit advisor that I cover in my book. The other one that was involved in the Bolshevik Revolution at the time was, in 1917, was the ungodly and wicked apostate Presbyterian Woodrow Wilson. He was president at the time. And Woodrow Wilson facilitates 300 Jewish leaders leaving New York City with Leon Trotsky to have a secret train go into Russia so that the Jews can be openly behind the Bolshevik Revolution and the Jews can be blamed for it. And without Woodrow Wilson notifying Canada to let that ship of traitors across the Atlantic, they would have never made it. So Woodrow Wilson facilitated the Bolshevik Revolution, and the right-hand man, the overseer of Woodrow Wilson, was not Edward Mandell House. Edward Mandell House was the tool for Woodrow Wilson in foreign matters. That Texan, that 33rd degree Freemason, that traitor Edward Mandell House. You can read a 2-volume set called The Intimate Papers of Colonel House. The real advisor to Woodrow Wilson was a 4th degree Knight of Columbus. His name was Joseph P. Tumulty. Joseph P. Tumulty was the advisor of Woodrow Wilson for 2 years when Woodrow Wilson was governor of New Jersey, and he was the advisor of Woodrow Wilson while 2 terms in office of the President of the United States, until Wilson was poisoned and his wife Ellen took over and was their acting president until Wilson dies, or actually until Harding is made president. Harding was a 33rd degree Freemason. Warren Harding did many good things, but he was a 33rd degree Freemason, and he continued the work of Woodrow Wilson in financing and abetting the Bolshevik Revolution. The leaders of the whites, the Orthodox whites, was betrayed by America and Great Britain. According to Stan Monteith in his very good book, Brotherhood of Darkness, he proves that Warren Gamaliel Harding, gave $60 million in aid and supplies to the Reds, to the Bolsheviks, facilitating their success, because without American help and supplies, the Russian people would have rose up and killed those bastard Bolsheviks. And I use the term bastard scripturally, pursuant to Hebrews 12, God is not their father. The devil is their father. So, with this Russian Revolution, and any Russian historian will teach you that the Bolshevik Revolution was really the second French Revolution. The father of the French Revolution of 1789 is the same father of the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, and that's the Black Pope. The French Revolution was a communist revolution. The Bolshevik Revolution was a communist revolution. The Jesuits benefited in both revolutions. But at the same time, the open and false policy is, this wasn't done by Jesuits, this was done by communists. As I cover in my book and in my PowerPoint, the Jesuits trained Rousseau, one of the fathers of the French Revolution. They trained Robespierre, the mass murderer in the Directory, beheaded 40,000 people, something like that. And they also trained Napoleon at Corsica. So the Jesuits ran the entire French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars. They ran the entire Bolshevik Revolution and the Bolshevik Wars from 1917 to 1922. And there will be American troops dispatched to Moscow to further facilitate a successful Bolshevik Revolution. And William Grady covers this in his new work on the nation of Israel. He even has pictures of American troops in Moscow, I believe. The Bolshevik Revolution must succeed. It cannot fail, because the fall of Moscow is regarded as the second greatest event by Jesuit Edmund Walsh in his book, The Decline and Fall of the Russian Empire. He wrote in 1925. Walsh says that the fall of the Russian Empire is the greatest single event after the fall of the Roman Empire. Why? Because the Jesuits took Orthodox Russia, which includes the huge landmass of all of Russia, in 1917 and throughout the Civil War, ending in 1922 or thereabouts. At this time, the Jesuits running the Bolsheviks will take all of the Tsar's fortunes, the rubies, the emeralds, the gold. It's a huge fortune. And they will imprison the Russian Orthodox Patriarch. They will kill 5,000 priests and nuns of the Orthodox Church. And this is their vengeance, because the priests and nuns that they killed were against Vatican I, and were outrightly and outspokenly against the infallibility of the Pope of Vatican I. So they all have to die, and they will die. And while the Jesuits are at it, they're going to have fun with the Mennonites. So they're going to use their Bolsheviks to kill as many Mennonites and take turns gang raping the women during the Bolshevik Revolution. The Bolsheviks are going to serve as the crusaders for the Jesuits during the Bolshevik Revolution and succeeding Civil War, when the Orthodox people and the Orthodox leaders are betrayed and have to flee Russia. Joseph Stalin, who is the real Jesuit coadjutor at this time, he is going to lead the Bolshevik army in fighting General Stanislaw Sikorski, who is the great Polish general at the time. And General Sikorski defeats Stalin and saves Poland from a Bolshevik oppression. But there will come a certain Polish Roman Catholic out of Poland who will have known the Jesuits well, who admired the Jesuits, and he will be the first head of Lenin's Cheka. He'll be a vicious, bloodthirsty, murderous Jesuit inquisitor. And his name, out of Poland, is Felix Dzerzhinsky. Felix Dzerzhinsky will kill. He'll be rounding up all those marked for death, bringing them in the trucks, and shooting them in the back of the head in Lubianka. Lubianka will be the headquarters for the Holy Office of the Inquisition of the Jesuits. And they will shoot these people in the back of the head, take them out in mass burial grounds. Felix Dzerzhinsky was the great Grand Inquisitor of the Jesuits that Dostoevsky warned about.
So, I'm sorry, but here I have to interrupt because the whole lecture is going on for almost 2 hours, and therefore I decided to split it right here. And you will see why I found this an opportune moment, because it is continuing very, very interesting. And in the original broadcast, taking about 2 hours, I can tell you there are more than 20 books mentioned and even partly read from. So this is very, very important to do your own study, and looking forward to continue to part 8 of this University of Hidden History and the Jesuits running Russia. Really a very interesting subject. Again, I'm sorry that I have to intervene here and split it in two, but 2 hours is just too long to listen to this wonderful history. So, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you back at the next time for the University of Hidden History with Jon Phelps for part 8 and the concluding part of that one. And until then, please read your Bible and study things for yourself. Always question everything and don't believe anything that you didn't confirm with your own research. Maranatha. We must start at the foot of the cross. For our souls in danger, we're at loss. And when we kneel in that awesome place, at that very moment, you'll feel God's grace. Friend, let me tell you, you need to know, there is heaven, also hell below. Christ died on that cross to set you free from your vile sins and hell's agony. You're God's enemy without the cross. Reject Christ, and to God your dross. To the prison of hell he will send, just Christ's work on the cross makes amends. God hates those who try to enter in, the gates of heaven still full of sin. Only his Son can take sin away. Go to the foot of the cross this day. God has provided only one way to enter heaven's wondrous array. Accept what Jesus did for us all. He paid our debt, so hell won't befall. Go to the foot of the cross this day. His precious blood washes sin away. We each need to think more of his cross. Without our Savior, we're total loss.